Okay, so please turn on your camera, participants. And if you're not speaking, please turn off your microphones.
Turn on your camera, participants.
Okay, so we just sent out the links to everyone, to all the participants and judges and everyone that's involved in the tournament. So let's wait for like 3 minutes until people find the YouTube link, comment the live stream, and then let's shortly start debate. Okay, so we're starting. So welcome all participants, judges, and everyone involved in the tournament to the grand finals of the JFN Online Debating Championship.
First of all, huge congratulations for all those teams who came to the grand finals. The entire tournament has been incredibly competitive. So once again, huge congratulations. So on side proposition, we have Sinsa Harubang, and side opposition, we have Team Lizzo.
We're debating under the motion, this house prefers a world where human beings are no longer fertile. Judging this round is Chief Panel Yoon from NLCS Jeju, Fred Lee, our Deputy Chief Adjudicator from NLCS Jeju as well, Seungrok Lee from Ridgewood High School, New Jersey, Brian Chi from Taft School in the US, Douglas Kim from Chadwick International in Songdo, Sanghyung Lee from Minjok Sawan학교, Erica Kang from Phillips Academy Andover. It is an honor to judge with all of these really highly qualified judges in the round. So without further ado, let us invite Prime Minister to the podium. Here, here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do not think that humanity must reproduce through the means of natural reproduction with fertility, right? We do not think that the concept of natural reproduction is as beneficial as our current society thinks. And throughout our case, we're going to prove to you why we can propose to you a better world with people getting less sacrifice when it comes to reproduction itself. Our stance is mainly in two layers, right? Firstly, we think that natural reproduction is a norm rather than a benefit to our society, right? The human race has coped with this process for centuries and even more, but the truth is we do not believe that being fertile has gave us any benefits other than having the ability to have sexual discourse and to have a baby, right? We think that the conclusion we make here is that the so-called important natural reproduction is simply an outdated norm rather than something that actually gives us tangible benefits to the humanity itself. But secondly, so we also think that the harms it poses to humanity is greater than the benefits that it actually gives to our society. But secondly, what world do we want to live in at the end of the day? We want to live in a world where women don't need to get pressured to sacrifice a part of them for the baby. We want to live in a world where women are not pressured to become a natural mother. We want to live in a world where humanity can utilize the technology they have in order to reproduce rather than pressure the woman to sacrifice a part of themselves, right? We want to utilize artificial means like making stem cells or making designer babies and the technology that we have in our society the best in order to decrease the amount of sacrifice and decrease the amount of burden that our humanity has about natural reproduction, and rather utilize these certain technologies in order to reproduce, right? So throughout my speech, I'm going to prove to you two things. A, why natural reproduction is just an outdated social norm and why it harms humanity. But B, we're also going to prove to you the other benefits that come from our case of having the technology to reproduce itself. So firstly, let's move on to my first argument. We're going to prove to you why it's simply an outdated social norm. So why is that so? Why do we stick to this method of natural reproduction in the status quo? There are two reasons why. Firstly, we've done it for ages, right? Natural reproduction done with fertility was the first means of reproducing to every single animal in the earth, and it was what every race and every organism does, right? That's exactly why our society views this as normal, and our society views this as the natural thing to do. But the truth is, the only reason why our society views this as natural is because it was done for ages, right? We do not see the actual tangible benefits that natural reproduction gives to us, rather than it just simply being viewed as normal, right? But secondly, we think that this has become a social norm in our society. So why is that so? We think that the norm that the natural process of having sexual discourse is ethical is just simply a social norm, right? People simply think that people think that it's natural for women to reproduce. People think that it's natural for women to do the reproducing. People think that it's natural to have that physical process of reproducing, right? But no, thank you. No, thank you, sir. But we think that the truth is, this is just an outdated social norm. So we're going to prove to you why this is a norm, why this is just a norm that does not give us any benefits. So what are the harms that come from natural reproduction, right? We think that it's mainly harmful because it harms humanity rather than giving them benefits. There are three steps in how natural reproduction happens, right? Firstly, we think that the society pressures women that they must be the ones who have to go through certain physical pressure in order to have the baby. They pressure the woman that they have to have a baby, but we think that is not true, right? But the second process is that when women are pressured to have a baby, we think that they have to go through the burden of sacrificing their own lives in order to have that baby through the process of physical sexual discourse or through the process of natural reproduction, right? So what women do in this process is they have to give up a part of their own lives in order to have that baby, who is a completely different human being from me, right? The women have to give up everything that they have. They have to give up their jobs, and they have to go through the social norm and social pressure that social society that pressures them to become a good mother and a good person who works at home in order to have that baby. And because this is a harm that follows because of the social norm that women should be the ones who physically reproduce, we think that this is an extreme harm that we see from natural reproduction, right? This harm exists as long as we select the process of natural reproduction. But the truth is, these are all harms that are sacrificed just because we hold a social norm in our society, right? No, thank you, sir, but we do not want that to happen. So the third analysis in this argument is we're going to prove to you why our world is the only world that can solve this social norm, right? We think that this social norm is not going to disappear in our society suddenly when we go on with this certain natural change, right? We think that in the status quo, people simply think that natural reproduction is normal. That's why they take all of the other alternatives like having designer babies, right? They just simply think that these kind of technologies are wrong because they've never seen it before, because they've never seen the artificial process before, right? That's exactly why only when we turn into a world where people do not have fertility at all, we think that is only the moment in where we can take away that burden from humanity in the first place. But then let's go on to our second argument. We're going to prove to you the other benefits that will come in throughout our case, right? We think that firstly, our world can take away the discrimination that happens because of natural fertility in the first place. There are two things, right? A, we think that there is a norm that women must be the ones who sacrifice through natural reproduction. But B, we also think that our current society alienates the people who are infertile, who cannot have babies. They alienate the people who choose not to have babies simply because this is a social norm that people must have babies through natural reproduction, right? We think that this can be solved under our case because when society resorts to a more artificial means of reproduction, this is better because having a baby no longer requires your physical factor, right? It is now done by technology. You can actually select the kind of technology that you want to utilize in order for you to have a baby. And thus we think that when this process doesn't come with your physical factors or the social norms that we have in our society, we think that it's going to be better because we can take away the discrimination that our society holds against the people who are infertile or against the people or against the women who choose not to take the burden of having a baby in the first place. And for these reasons, we're more than proud to propose to you a world in where society gets away from the social norms that aren't even beneficial in the first place. Thank you for listening.
Prime Minister spoke for 6 minutes and 18 seconds. Thank you for a wonderful speech. And without further ado, let us invite Leader of Opposition to the podium. Hear, hear. I'm hearing some echoing. Okay.
Judges, in this debate, you get to pick genocide or suicide on side proposition or practicality and a principled stance on side opposition. This is literally a choice between life or death, and proposition is pro-death, your death's judge. Making that clarify, let me move on to my rebuttals. Number one, Mr. and Madam Speaker, I think the team government is misunderstanding the entire debate. This debate had to be a debate between making a baby or not. The places that literally use STEM systems and create like artificial babies in the current status quo are called fertility centers, right? Because this motion says that humanity is no longer fertile, we think these methods should also be banned and abolished under their side, right? But number two, this debate had to state that humans should be no longer naturally fertile in order to make this debate happen that way. Therefore, all of their arguments proposed in today's debate is completely flawed, but still, we will still rebut to the completely illogical arguments made in today's debate. Number one, they talked about social norms. Firstly, as long as babies exist, we think that the norms that they claim are so crucial and so like important in today's debate will still continue, right? Because of the reasons, because women still have a dominant role still take a dominant role when raising babies or whatnot and taking care of those babies. We think that these no thank you sir, these norms that they claim will still exist under their side. But number two, we think that this is a complete problem solution mismatch. Why is this though? Because abortions, like methods like abortion still exist. We don't need to put like a humanity completely on like an end in order to achieve this solution for this kind of problem, right? But number three, we think that their entire case is not mutually exclusive because in the status quo, we still have abortion centers or like fertility centers in which the methods that they claim can also be achieved under our side. And therefore, we think that the arguments that they claim under today's debate is completely flawed. Making that clarify, we as Oppo prove to you two main things. Number one, the goal of a species is to perpetuate itself. Number two, the death of a humanity will do more harm than just humanity. Making that clarify, let me move on to my first argument, which explains why evolution is perpetuation. The point of every single species is to perpetuate and evolve. For thousands and thousands of years, evolution has pointed in one direction, and as time passes, every generation is improving the IQ from the previous one, right? The government team is cutting the process of this evolution and putting it into an end. Not only is this very hopeless to the future generations, but it will literally create a dystopia for the remaining generations. Let me illustrate this world a little bit clearer. Number one, the system of nations would work under an anarchy. In a world where you know that the end is near, the government has no incentive to function. The citizens have no incentive to work. This means that every individual living on Earth would be so egocentric and selfish. The most peaceful world that I can ever imagine under their side is when rich people would squander money all around and poor people will starve to death because now there are no policies that help them survive under dysfunctioning governments, and there will be further wealth disparity, no more hope under their society. But number two, let's move on to the illustration of a more dystopic community. Proposition is taking away any sense of a criminal justice system. In Proposition's world, why do people not do crimes? Are they going to be arrested? Who wants to become a cop and fulfill their jobs? The malfunctioning of society will literally lead to a disaster. People will not just lie back down and live the normal life as what they are doing right now, but rather they will be infuriated and filled with madness. Crimes would overflow the community and disorder would inundate the community and the society. This motion is a creation of a complete madness. Team Proposition is encouraging and rooting for the society, and we as a responsible opposition would not want a society like this. Making that clarified, let me move on to my second argument, which explains the right to life. First and foremost, why do we stigmatize suicide in today's society? Because suicide is a societal failure. The moment one of us gives up their life, we all failed our duty as a society, and this is why all nations around the world are trying their best to recognize the prevailing issues that lead to suicide and try to stop it in their best case. This is why we see movements against cyberbullying in governments such as Japan or Korea. Mr. and Madam Speaker, the biggest problem that Team Government is providing us is that they're literally encouraging genocide to the entire human species, right? They're encouraging an act that the current society has strongly opposed to, no thank you sir, from the very start of the civilization, but from the very start of the human civilization. The UDHR includes the right to life the foremost. The first right that is included in the UDHR is the right to life, right? Without living, we cannot get any other basic rights, and opposition has rights. Proposition just has one big wrong. Proposition doesn't take away our Proposition doesn't just take away our bodily autonomy. They take away our lives, and this is genocide, Mr. and Madam Speaker, the intentional extension of a species. And finally, because since Proposition did not take any POIs in today's Prime Minister's speech, answer this question like the second speaker, please. If humans die off, who would take care of the nuclear power plants that we leave behind in the society? And because of all of these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Leader of Opposition spoke for 5 minutes and 47 seconds. Thank you for your excellent speech. And without further ado, let us invite the Deputy Prime Minister to the podium. Hear, hear.
May I begin? Mr. Madam Speaker, we think that the crux of this debate, the spirit of the motion, is to prove to us whether natural reproduction is beneficial for society, whether the social norms that exist in society can be disintegrated or disseminated to the very world where humanity is no longer fertile. We think that that's the exact reason why we believe that when Team Opposition never succeeds to prove how in their counterfactual they're going to, disintegrate the social norms that are so prevalent in society, they can never win this debate, right? Because we think that the very norms, the very dogmas that we have within status quo, the very idea that natural selection is absolutely good, and the very fact that if you're infertile, you're a disabled individual because now you don't have a functioning reproductive organ, we think that this very idea is harmful. We think that this is the very world, we think that this is the very idea that we want to decrease, we don't want in society. We think that that's the reason why we believe that their arguments talking about these kinds of ideas of right to life, whatnot, is very irrelevant in today's debate. So let me go to my first rebuttal on the idea of social norms. So PM proudly told you how we believe that there is an existing social norm, right? We think that the very idea that natural reproduction is the absolute good or not is very harmful, because we think that this is actually harmful because it forces sacrifice, it forces pressure upon individuals. But moreover, as Honorable PM talked about, we think that it unfairly burdens women, but moreover, individuals who are infertile at the end of the day. We think that this is something that we do not want. So we think that the question here is that how do they solve or break the social norm, right? Because we think that them simply talking about genocide or whatnot is simply them running on a negative case, right? Because we think that when they simply come to the podium talking about these ideas, they can never prove to us at the very end of the day of how are they actually going to solve the problems, how are they actually going to help the disenfranchised or the pressurized individuals within society. We think that this is the calculus. We think that this is the burden of proof of team opposition, which was never clearly explained by leader of opposition. We think that that's the reason why they get to never win this debate, right? But moreover, we also think that they talk about it's a debate. LO tells us that it's not a debate of whether natural reproduction or whatnot, but they tell us that it's a debate of whether having life or not. We don't think that this is the framing of the motion. Why? Two reasons. First reason is because we think that this debate clearly tells you a world where humanity is no longer fertile. We think that this means that the fiat of the debate is the fact that individuals have, and there are existing measures, as we see in status quo. For instance, we see human cloning, we see stem cell reproduction or whatnot. We think that where the moment where the reason why we actually have these kinds of families, the reason why we actually have natural reproduction is because we think that these were the only options available in previous societies. Women were the only parties or actors which were available for carrying their own descendants or whatnot. So we think that this is the reason why we believe that when the actual reason why we actually had these kinds of women and we actually had these kinds of natural reproduction. And when they talk about this very idea about having these kinds of, I don't know, like this debate is about having like babies or not, we think that it's very irrelevant, right? Because we think that at the very end of the day, they have to prove to us how actually having natural reproduction comes up with so much benefit, which leader of opposition clearly failed to do so. Therefore, we want next speaker to explain to us how the very idea of natural reproduction is so much more beneficial than the counterfactual, where we have technologies, where we have existing alternatives that can aid people in order to have no burden or no pressure while they reproduce. We think that that's why we agree with the fact when they simply come up to the podium talking about the right to life or the idea of right to evolution, because we think that it's better, the perpetuating idea is better solved or better achieved on team governments, because women are no longer burdened. We think that the reason why these women and why society suffers from such low birth rates in status quo is because there are so prevalent social norms that these kinds of natural reproduction or these kinds of ideas of maternity is very effective, and it's like the absolute social good. We don't want this to happen. Therefore, we support a society where individuals are on their own having babies through the aids of technology. We think that that's the world that we want to live in. So let me go to my third argument on the idea of decreasing stigma. As PM told you, we think that the status quo is very problematic because of social norms. And we think that this unfairly harms the individuals who are not fertile in status quo. What do I mean by this? We think that the very idea that certain individuals are fertile and certain individuals are inherently born infertile is the exact reasons why these individuals face discrimination and face these kinds of scrutiny in status quo. We think that the very idea that these individuals are harmed by those uncontrollable traits is very harmful. And that's why we think that the moment where individuals are no longer fertile, we think that more individuals are now going to find other methods. But not only that, we think that there's no opportunity, there's no window of opportunity for these individuals to discriminate based on these ideas. We think that that's better because no individuals are going to be framed or characterized as individuals or disabled people of their reproductive organs, reproductive abilities, or whatnot. That's the exact world that we want to live in, an equal society where the idea of natural reproduction is not dogmatized, so that individuals are able to live happily based on their pure decisions based on technology or not. So therefore, we believe that this is the reason why we're more than proud to propose.
So DPM spoke for 6 minutes and 38 seconds. Thank you for your wonderful speech. Without further ado, let us invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to the podium. Here, here.
So, Mr. Speaker, as our Leader of Opposition has already told you clearly in her speech, we think that the proposition side, just like the third round, basically prepped under the wrong context, right? Because he told you that the entire concept of fertility itself actually encompasses the entire idea of a child being born in the first place, right? But despite this, let me still rebut to the content that they have brought up in their arguments that they have brought up so far. So the first speaker comes up to the podium and mainly focuses their speech around basically how they're going to get rid of those kinds of social norms and whatever, right? They talk about how they're going to get rid of social norms by letting women basically no longer have that kind of encumbering like burden of having a baby, right? But first of all, we don't understand why they're acting all pro-feminist in the first place, right? So this is because we think that number one, when women are actually empowered, we think that women are actually empowered to have a baby, and actually the majority of people actually want to have their own baby in the first place, right? So we don't understand why they're doing this kind of unfairly in the first place and enforcing this kind of thing. But number two, we think that under their side, they're being so inefficient and not respecting the woman because of the fact that instead of actually taking away the woman's ability to actually create the babies in the first place, we think that rather they should be actually making the conditions of the woman more comfortable in the first place and actually less pressuring and cumbersome in the first place, right? But number three, we think that even if we assume that everything that they have told us so far is true, we think that this is not exclusive because of the fact that even under our side in the status quo, there are things like fertility centers where basically things like artificial and designer babies are created in the first place, right? So having said that, let's move on to the second point. No. So we think that the government side basically assumes wrongly that the social norms that are so prevalent in the status quo are basically the main issue of this debate, right? But first of all, we think that they have never even mechanized as to why that is the crux of the debate, besides like unfairly burden pushing us and saying that we have never elaborated on why our metric is the most important, right? But number three, we think that even if we do go with their wrong interpretation of this motion and basically say that things like cloning or artificial means of creating a baby are better and more preferable for the woman because it's less pressuring, we think that still, if a woman is actually unable to naturally produce a baby by being fertile under our side, then they can simply use the mechanisms that the proposition side has wasted so much time telling us about, right? We think it's because of the fact that all of their points are actually not exclusive in the first place, and we can achieve them just as well under our side by making women fertile, yes.
So how do you think that these individuals would reach out to fertility centers when there are existing stigma towards the very idea of being infertile or not? How are these individuals going to access these centers at the end of the day?
We think that first of all, if a woman basically their desire to have a baby actually overrides the desire about the amount of care that they put into those kinds of social stigmas, and basically they are going to seek those kinds of fertility centers in the first place, regardless of that kind of social stigma, social dogma, or whatnot, right? We think that that's the reason as to why fertility centers exist in the first place, and that's the reason as to why they are popular in the first place in the current status quo. Having made that clear, let me now move on to our side's extension and third argument, which is basically about the reverberations and repercussions that's going to happen when the human species, basically no longer exists, right? Because assuming that they are prepped for the right side. For the right motion. So we think that basically this motion is bad for more than just humanity, right? So why is this true? A few reasons why. Number one, we think that basically for the other species, when the humans are on the way out, we will basically be unable to actually tend to other species in the first place, right? Like for example, consider domesticated animals. They cannot actually exist outside of 1,000 years of cohabitation with humans in the first place because of the fact that when they have no means to actually independently fend for themselves, they too will become extinct because of the fact that they have already adapted way back to actually live in a state where it's imperative for them to actually fend where it's not imperative for them to fend for their own necessities like food, because of the fact that humans provided for them in the first place, right? So we think that basically all kinds of pets such as dogs or cats or whatnot, those kinds of domesticated animals are going to die under their side, right? But second of all, let's talk about the other ramifications of their side regarding, except for the remaining species that are going to exist and once the human species basically no longer becomes fertile. So we think that basically when humans are no longer actually around to regulate their machines and technology and whatnot, we think that basically that's going to be a really terrible road and actually going to create an extreme like devastation, right? So we think that the proposition side basically cannot just assume that the remnants of humanity will magically solve themselves, right? We think that because of the fact that if you consider things like nuclear reactors, for instance, or like nuclear power plants that are left behind by the humans, infrastructure that become rusty when they're uncatered for, we think that all of those kinds of things are going to be left to collapse. And because of the fact that humanity is not actually helping solve those kinds of technological problems, we think that that's really bad under their side, and that's part of the serious ramifications that are going to occur under their side. So why does this matter? Number one, we think that even if we do accept the claims of proposition that humanity is basically that's going to happen to humanity, which is also something that we do not buy, we think that still that does not actually mitigate those kinds of inevitable repercussions for the other bystander species and for the planet itself, such as the technology and those kinds of machinery that the humans have left behind, right? But second of all, we think that just killing off all of the humans because of the problems that they have caused is, first of all, a complete problem solution mismatch, but second of all, also is completely irresponsible and negligent to the remnants of the species, and it actually reaches out to much more than just humanity, right? So Mr. Speaker, we think that basically what the government side right now is doing is, first of all, they are basically having prepped for the wrong motion in the first place, but second of all, I have engaged you in my speech clearly as to why their side isn't exclusive at all in the first place, because we can have that just as well. We can have all of those kinds of fertility centers and whatnot. We can do all those kinds of cloning activities and stuff, which is why we think that because of the fact that none of their points stand at the end of the day, I am more than proud to oppose.
The puny leader of operations spoke for 6 minutes and 4 seconds. Thank you for your excellent quality speech. Without further ado, let us invite Government Whip to the podium. Here.
Start.
Whenever you're ready.
So, Mr. Madam Speaker, from the start of the debate, we clearly see that we actually proved you from the Prime Minister, we clearly proved you why our team's framing cannot happen on their side, right? However, we believe that the opposition team does not actually listen to what our team actually proved you. And let me clearly prove you why our team won today's debate by giving you one clarification and moving on to our team's main two clashes. So straightly move on to this clarification. They keep on telling us that they also have these fertility sensors and people and women can actually go to these fertility centers to actually get babies or whatnot. However, Mr. Madam Speaker, we believe that this is totally not available on their side. Why? Because we believe that on their side, these women, or for example, people who go to fertility centers are people who cannot lay babies, who actually went through a process of abortion and whatnot. However, we believe that these people who went through this process of abortion and cannot have babies actually have a very strong stigma towards these ideas that they cannot have a baby, and they actually get pressure from society that they cannot lay babies. And we believe that that's the exact reason why these people cannot actually access these fertility centers, because they already have so much big stigma from society, and they already got so much pressure from the society because they cannot lay babies, or either they had an abortion. So we believe that's the exact reason why these people have so much strong stigmas and they cannot actually access these fertility centers in the first place. And moving straight on to these two main clashes. So the first question on the idea about whether a natural reproduction makes the humanity to evolve or rather deters it. So firstly, they keep on telling us that evolution is perpetuation, because they tell us that we are cutting out the process of evolution, and government has no incentive to actually function if there's no next generation or whatnot. However, firstly, we believe that there wasn't enough explanation from the leader of opposition about what kind of evolution they're talking about, and we do not understand how actually the lack of next generation actually cuts this off. And even if we say so, even if you understand that no next generation does not lead to government moving, we believe that that's the exact reason why their whole first stance fails. We clearly proved it from the start of the debate and from the Prime Minister why our framing told you that we still have sustainable movements such as cloning and actually growing of stem cells and whatnot. We believe that we clearly show you how we have a second generation. We clearly show you how there's a next generation on our side, and therefore we believe that since the whole premise is under this idea that if we don't have a next generation, there are arguments that since we proved you from the framing why we still have a next generation, we believe that that's the exact reason why the first argument's premise totally fails, and therefore we believe that the first argument also fails at the same time. And moving on to why Team 1 on the first point, we clearly told you about how natural production is very harmful for these people who live in society. We clearly told you why it is not an actual method that brings benefits, right? We told you that it was just a simple tradition or culture which actually came from a long time ago, and it does not actually bring you tangible benefits or whatnot. We clearly proved you why in this process, people in this society actually get harmed, right? We told you about how especially women from these people actually lose big proportion of their dreams and hopes, right? We told you why these people simply lose their jobs and their dreams just because the reason that these people make you to be make you to become a good mom and a good person. So you believe that that's the exact reason why these people, under the social pressure that you have to take care of your baby and you have to lay your baby, we believe that that's the exact reason why these people simply give up their dreams and hopes because they have to lay this baby. So we believe that the next speaker should come out to the podium and tell us why they can actually break the social norm and why they can actually affect these social norms at the end of the day. So moving on to the second clash, they told us about how there's this right to life, right? They told us how they have this, we actually like have so much suicide and it's like a genocide on our team. However, two layers of response towards these arguments. So firstly, we believe that the logic itself that the opposition team brings is very wrong. Why? Because we believe that we don't argue to a woman who doesn't lay a baby that you actually kill the baby, right? Just because the reason that you don't lay a baby does not mean that you're actually killing a life or killing a baby, right? We believe that that's the same idea. Why? Because on our side, what we're just doing is not laying babies, but we still have a next generation. So on our side, even though if woman does not lay babies, it does not mean that we're like killing babies who do not actually exist at the first place. So we believe that's the exact reason why the whole logic that they bring from the first place was wrong. And even if we say so, even if we say that we actually like are doing some kind of genocide which does not exist, we believe that this is not mutually exclusive. Why? Because we believe that on their side, they're on their world, they're laying babies which they can't even take responsibility on. For example, like there's thousands of babies which come from Africa in very poor situations in Harlem, which actually live in just slums and die due to starvation. They do not care. They do not take any responsibility of the babies which are actually laid. And also in their case, we believe that there's so much problems such as abortion. Right? We see how actually in poor countries, there are not even abortion facilities made in the first place. Thousands of babies die, and thousands of moms also die in the same time. So we believe that on their side, when only like rich people can get abortion centers, and in most cases, abortion itself is illegal. We believe that on their case, they cannot succeed in improving this point because on their side, abortion itself will not work in the first place. And also, we believe that it's not mutually exclusive because on their world, the same amount of babies are dying every time, which actually existed because of the reason that they do not have enough facilities and resources to live at the first place. On the other hand, we clearly proved you why it's harmful for the women, right? We told you why they have a social pressure existing in society and how these social pressures actually limit them from actually achieving their dreams and their hopes. And we clearly told you why, especially in religious countries such as like in Islam or Muslim, we told you why women are being very oppressed, right? So you believe that that's the exact reason why on their side, these women cannot actually achieve their dreams and actually it's just forced to lay babies, like they're just slaves that actually lay babies. So we believe that that's the exact reason why on their side it's a traditional norm which should actually be broken. On their side, it's going to be so much harmful for these women and people. And we believe that that's the exact reason why on their side they cannot prove you why actually having this traditional norm will bring you tangible benefits. So lastly, moving on to each team's best world comparison. So on their side, we believe that they will prove us that we actually lead to massive genocide and we will not have a next generation, right? However, Mr. Speaker, we really from the get-go of this debate, we clearly proved you why it's not going to happen. We told you why there's going to be a next generation. We clearly proved you why it's not a genocide because these babies did not exist in the first place in our world. And on the other hand, we clearly told you why this natural reproduction itself is a very big harm to people and especially women. And therefore, we clearly see why our team clearly wins in today's, and therefore I'm proud to oppose.
Okay, Government Whip spoke for 6 minutes and 18 seconds. Thank you for your wonderful speech. Without further ado, let us invite Opposition Whip to the podium. Here, here.
Here, here.
Am I audible? Okay. I'll start. other side just doesn't get the motion at the first place, but also the problematic thing in today's motion is the idea that they prep basically the wrong stuff, right? The idea of these kind of STEM or other kind of things of like other kinds of ways of like making babies or whatnot, that counts as the idea of fertility for humanity, right? When the motion states that it is about the fertility of humanity as a general, that means that any ways of making baby does indeed count. The reason why these centers that they are presenting, such as like STEM centers or whatnot, they usually do indeed need the basic necessities that we usually make through the process of fertility as the traditional way, but also these kind of centers are called fertility centers at the end of the day. So we tell you at the end, already their side loses for the reasons of how they prep the wrong side. I like to further elaborate on this later. But also another problematic thing coming from today's debate about the idea of them never even attempting to try to prove exclusivity coming from their side, but also the other problem of how their side does not get exactly what they're trying to propose for. And I like to further explain in today's clashes by first going into why our side actually prepped it, right? Because it was a parallel debate rather than down to who actually engages properly. No, but also second clash about the idea of their norms, the ideas presented by their side about the norms and how these kind of women are going to be harmed, which also wasn't exclusive. Now I like to move on to the basic idea of which side actually prepped it right. When we look at the motion grammatically too, it is the basic idea of fertility of humanity as a general. This means that the other side needed to prove, especially even though it might sound like an insane motion about how should he actually reproduce or not. But the problem is that we had a veto system, meaning that they had the chance to not choose this motion, but because they misinterpreted, this means that they need to take the burden. So especially because making this clear, this means that the other side needed to prove the idea of why we should not reproduce or not. No other technology stuff, because that does indeed include fertility and the basic concept of it too. But also we believe that for them to come out and say all these things did not really work out well, as I like to further prove why. When it comes to these fertility systems at the first place, we believe that we actually have this too. The idea of fertility systems still exists on our side, and the only exclusivity and the only attempt of exclusivity coming from their the idea of stigma. We believe that this makes no sense. We do have the ability to tell the citizens, yes, maybe if you want, indeed, you can indeed do these kind of other like STEM systems or whatnot. But also, we believe that the idea of the gradual helping of these people and the gradual decline of the stigma is indeed increasing. This means that we should not suddenly just cut it up and say, hey, there's no way we're going to get rid of these stigma of men or certain women that can't create babies. We believe that there will be indeed a day where this stigma does indeed get better at the end of the day. The reason why stigma against these kind of people was worse hundreds of years ago is because of the gradual progress that we're indeed having. We cannot just get rid of the most important traits of a human being about the idea of basic reproduction. We believe that this is idea, and I like to further prove this why in the second clash too. So second clash is about the idea of norms in society and about the things that they have provided, which is also total nonsense, and especially they prep the wrong side. But what does this come down to? Because it's a parallel debate, this means that which side actually proves with there are two things that each side needed to do. First, prove why you prep the right side, but also still engage upon the other side's idea. This is something that the other side never did, because every speech was repetitive, and the only way for them to rebut is by saying that first that thing is not true, and then just moving on to their side's case. So now to basically make the clashes based upon the ideas of how we engage their side. So basically, we have told you that the idea of these or whatnot, indeed no, or indeed things that already exist. But also, if that is the only option, this is going to be terrible. One of the major arguments coming from our side, from the first speaker's speech, was about the idea of poor people. We have told you that these people can't afford this at the first place. This is something that was just totally dropped from the other side, as we believe that because of this, idea, their side already fails. But also, the other thing coming from our side is about the idea of how we need to make the woman's life much better. We can't just say, hey, I don't think the government is responsible enough to just make the woman's life better. We should just totally give up and not let the people have the reproductive system at the first place. We believe that this is just total nonsense. The government's responsibility is to make people's life better, not just take away their ability because they can't maintain it. That's not what a government does. A government is supposed to actually make it better for them. And we believe that has been gradually indeed changing. The idea of feminist movement popping up and indeed making the life of a pregnant woman much better, and those ideas are getting much better. The other side also talked about the pressure on these moms or these kind of women about how they need to be good mothers. The idea of being a good mother still exists on their side, because even if they get these babies from these fertility centers or whatnot, they still need to take care of it. They still have the burden from these Middle East countries, these extreme ideas that they were coming up about how these kind of people still need to take care of the babies. The moment we get this system, we believe that these kind of people will still get the babies, meaning they still have the continuous pressure of being a woman. We believe that rather we should actually try to change this around and try to make the natural system still be available and make these people actually have a choice. But but before that, but also we like to tell you why, especially the exclusivity part, does not make any sense. We believe that one of the most important parts in today's debate was about the idea of exclusivity. Let's just assume that everything that we said is wrong, but because of the idea that we actually engaged to their side, and we still take this debate home for the reasons of how we actually proved you that these kind of things can happen on our side, and we can keep on advocating for these kind of policies at the end of the day as they're talking about these STEM projects or whatnot. We believe that especially because of this, we already take this debate home. But because we have told you that we have prepped the right side and we have already proved you, but also because we have told you that the idea of humans extincting, because we're not saying that the like killing the baby inside is a suicide or whatnot. We're saying that humanity itself is committing suicide by putting a genocide upon themselves. We believe that especially if the idea is we're not going to reproduce anymore, governments aren't going to care about helping poor people in society anymore, because the idea of solving poverty is no longer existing, because we don't have a future at the end of the day. Already these poor people will be the most affected ones, but also even the rich people, they're just going to take whatever they can and try to live as long as possible. Basically, they'll be purged for about hundreds of years. We believe that especially because of these ideas, we believe that their side has prepped the wrong side, but also because it was a parallel debate, meaning it came down to engagement. But because we engaged them, but also said that their side's material is not exclusive at all, and we actually proved to you how we can do this on our side too. All the benefits coming from their side come to us, meaning we won this debate, but also we provided you benefits for why traditional way is also beneficial. We believe that by these reasons, we're proud to oppose.
So opposition whip spoke for 6 minutes and 24 seconds. Thank you for your excellent speech. Without further ado, let us invite the final speaker of team opposition to the podium. Hear, hear.
Here, here.
So, Mr. Speaker, in my speech, I want to explain clearly as to the reasons why we clearly take this debate home, right? First of all, let me talk about the arguments that each side's brought up, right? So their side, because of the fact that social stigma is basically their only premise and the only thing that they actually engaged upon in this debate in the first place, I want to focus on this when talking about the logic of the arguments. So number one, we think that from the very get-go, they basically assume that the stigma basically means that women are unable to actually have that kind of access to fertility centers in the first place, right? We think that that's completely wrong. And the very fact itself that in the United States in 2010, like 60,000 women actually access those kinds of fertility centers in the first place, despite that kind of so-called stigma, means that their case is basically nonsense in the first place, right? But second of all, we think that when they consider the basic dogma towards women to be the most important crux of this debate and the only premise that we should be debating upon, we think that we still told you already many times that basically if they're so desperate to solve this issue of dogma and social stigma, then basically they should try to relieve women of that kind of social pressure in the first place, instead of taking away their ability to reproduce, which is what we told you many times in all of the speakers so far, right? So basically, we think that under their side, the right thing to do for the right solution for their side is basically to strive to solve those kinds of social stigma and dogma in the first place and make the conditions better for women instead of actually taking away their ability in the first place, right? But moreover, number three, look at the gradual diminishing of the social stigma in the current status quo in the first place, which is basically what our whip kept on telling you about, right? We think that basically, if you want to compare the conditions of a woman who was infertile a century ago versus a woman who was infertile in the status quo, then we obviously see massive improvements, and that just means that it's unfair to completely eradicate the reproductive system in the first place. That's just going to lead to negative effects, right? So basically, we think that to basically talk about the engagement, which is the second criteria which I want to judge this debate upon, right? Number one, the government side basically never actually engaged to our side, especially the deputy speaker, because of the fact that basically they never even engaged with our metrics except for just calling it nonsense, right? But number two, we think that they never actually proved the exclusivity of their case in the first place. Just because of the fact that there's a social stigma under our side does not necessarily mean that women are unable to actually access those centers in the first place. Even though that may make it more challenging, it does not take away their ability to do that. And rather, we think that under their side, what they should be doing is making those conditions better, which is why we completely identify a problem solution mismatch, even if we say that their wrong characterization of this debate is the right one, right? But number three, and most importantly, we think that under our side, we basically told you that we think that the right interpretation of this motion is basically that under their side, the humanity as a species itself will be extinct in the first place because of the fact that they will not be reproducing anymore, right? Basically, the government side never even engaged to this characterization of the debate in the first place, and they only engaged upon their best case scenario, which is basically that there's like a social stigma or whatever, but actually they never engaged to our interpretation of this debate. And because of the fact that they have only talked about their interpretation, which isn't even realistic and which isn't even that major to begin with, because of the fact that there are so many improvements, and because of the fact that we identify such a massive problem solution mismatch, I am more than proud to oppose.
Opposition reply spoke for 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Thank you for your excellent speech. Let us invite the final speaker of this debate to the podium. Here, here.
Here.
Mr. Madam Speaker, the opposition cannot frame this debate as a life and death debate, right? That's not only impossible to debate upon because how are we supposed to prove to you why death is better than life and how humanity is supposed to die out in the first place, right? You shouldn't try to win the finals by saying that living is better than dying, right? We think that the motion gives us the basic fiat that humanity will be able to find other methods that are existing, like cloning and making stem cells or making designer babies or whatnot, or whatever method it is. Humanity will be able to find other methods to sustain humanity in the first place. But B, we also think that this is the wrong framing because the motion only states that humanity will not have fertility. It doesn't say that making more humans is impossible, right? So what we're trying to say here is fertility means the ability for you to reproduce and the ability for you to get pregnant, right? But if you're making offspring with artificial made up stem cells, and if the baby doesn't even come from your body, we don't see how that is related with your ability to become pregnant and your ability to reproduce in the first place. If we're talking about cloning and talking about making individuals, why is that related with your ability to become pregnant in the first place, right? But see, even at their best case, when this is all fertility, we still think that there are methods of cloning, right? I hope the opposition isn't thinking that cloning uses sperm and egg cells in the first place, right? But then they suddenly want to, but then even if we debate under their case about talking about which side better gives the right to live, we think that the important thing that they fail to do in this debate is they fail to recognize the right to live when it comes to the mothers and when it comes to the woman in our society. The right to live doesn't only include the right to actually live, it includes the right to live a good quality of life, meaning that if the mothers are sacrificed to take away their whole life as an individual woman rather than to give it to the babies in our society by going through natural reproduction and going through the process of having this completely different individual in their body for 10 months, we think that is the process in where they lose out in giving the right to live to the mothers and to the women and to the individuals of our society itself. But then they suddenly want to say that all of our alternative work under their side. But here's when I get the strongest feeling that they're already stuck with the stereotypes that women should take the burden to reproduce, right? Because when they say that women can go to fertility centers and reach out to help, reach out for help, we think that is the moment where they're already stuck with the stereotype that women should go through this burden of the society, and if women want to have a baby that much, they should be the ones who should cope with the society's burden, right? We don't think that that's true because even if some women can go to fertility centers, we think that the majority of the women are stuck with the stereotype of the society telling them that they should cope with the problems of having a baby itself, because we think that these problems only exist in the instances of natural reproduction, because this is what forces the woman to go to that physical burden and that physical process of taking away their own sovereignty of their life and their own freedom of their body itself. But then let's also talk about the poor, right? They tell us why the technology of cloning and stem cells is expensive, right? The reason why this is expensive is because everyone thinks that natural reproduction is right, and that's why the society doesn't have an incentive to develop these certain technology, right? We think that this is going to change under our side, and where everyone is going to resort to these kind of means, right? So the last comparison here is that when they had to prove to us why natural reproduction is so exclusively beneficial to a point where you have to sacrifice millions of women from sacrificing their lives, right? They never engaged to our so even if you assume that every single social norm is solved under their side, we still think that women have to cope with the social burdens and the sacrificing their own lives under their side. They fail to acknowledge the problem of women sacrificing their own lives. They have never engaged with these certain concepts. So even if you assume that every single social norm does not exist under their side, we still think that women have to lose half of their lives in order to sacrifice for the babies. We don't think that this happens under our side because we take away the physical burden that women have. And for these reasons, we're more than proud to propose. Thank you.
So proposition reply, you spoke for 3 minutes, 45 seconds. Thank you all debaters for the excellent debate that happened in the past hour.
So what we're going to do now is all the judges are gonna go into a different call, and we're gonna come back with the results in the closing ceremony. So the new YouTube link for the closing ceremony would be open at around 9 o'clock. So please come to that new link at 9 o'clock.
Yes, everyone stay tuned. Bye-bye.
Bye.